shows that 911 emergencies are continuing to rise each year across the city. But EMS workers say that there's not enough resources to keep up.
My ambulance, I haven't seen it in at least well over 6 months.
So if you're experiencing an emergency, the ambulance coming to save you may not arrive as quickly as one would hope. And while some are blaming traffic congestion for shortages of available ambulances, others say those shortages are because New York City's experiencing more 911 calls than it has in a long time. But one thing's for sure, these shortages of ambulances, they're coming at the worst possible time for New York City.
Clinton Hill neighbors came out in numbers to draw attention to their safety concerns. I spoke with neighbors concerned about the increased litter, noise, and fights outside the two shelters.
10 years ago, it took EMS 9.6 minutes on average to get to a life-threatening call. The response time now 12.4 minutes. The FDNY's response to medical emergencies has nearly doubled.
Local families are terrified of the threat of more attacks, assaults, as are the residents of that shelter.
In Brooklyn, life-threatening emergencies have increased by 15.7% since 2021. It's the highest increase in the city.
This part's getting bad. We all know that it's getting bad.
Obviously, if you come out late night, something might happen.
There have been plenty of recent signs of how bad things have been getting. There's also what locals describe as a constant presence of loitering. 8th Avenue in Manhattan is getting attention, but for the wrong reasons.
EMS union boss Orrin Barzilay says delivery trucks and bike lanes are part of the problem.
If the response time is over 10 minutes for those types of calls, your next option for our crews will be probably take them to the morgue.
So New York is experiencing an enormous rise in life-threatening emergencies, yet there aren't enough ambulances to go around. But what nobody's talking about is many of those emergencies have a lot to do with the types of dangerous behavior we as a city have decided we're just going to let slide with no consequences, revealing that our ambulance shortage might not be as complicated as some people think it is. Yes, traffic congestion here is a massive issue, and yes, there have been reports of rising gang violence in our asylum shelters and on our streets. But the overwhelming majority of asylum seekers who've come to New York are not here committing crimes or hurting others. And as it turns out, traffic congestion also isn't to blame for this, even though the roads are packed with cars. Instead, those traffic jams are the fault of environmentally friendly yet flawed road redesigns that create unnecessary gridlock. Also, as you'll soon see, the lack of available life-saving ambulances would probably be lower if assaults, which result in 911 calls, weren't higher than they've been in quite some time. In fact, physical violence on our streets is now so bad, New York's former governor, David Paterson, who's 70 years old, was recently assaulted by a gang while walking his dog. And one of those arrested turns out to be a New York City employee who's got a job working for the MTA. On top of that, NYPD data shows assaults citywide are up 5% this year and 40% over the last 5 years, making it clear our city has an out-of-control safety problem that's been growing since before the asylum crisis became a crisis. Which brings us to the real reason we've now got an ambulance shortage in this city. Yes, we've got rising violence. Yes, we've got crazy traffic, but decisions made by our leaders have been making those two problems worse for a very long time. Because as you're about to see, our revolving door justice system that releases dangerous repeat criminals who assault others is one thing, but it's quite another for city planners to build things that create traffic jams on purpose just to disincentivize driving. Which, if you look around, obviously isn't working, and now our ambulances that are trying to rescue people in our progressive, high-crime environment can't do it because they're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. You know traffic's bad when the guy on the city bike can't even get through. But all this gridlock, it's a nightmare not just for drivers and commuters, but also for emergency vehicles, because even though they've got sirens and lights, they can turn them on all they want, but with all of this bumper-to-bumper traffic, there's really no way for them to get through, and that's a huge problem, leading to increased delays when emergency services try to come and save somebody. But not only do they have more work to do because we're living in an environment where there are more 911 calls than ever before for a variety of reasons, this traffic congestion has actually been made worse by city planners on purpose.
EMS union boss Orrin Barzilay says delivery trucks and bike lanes are part of the problem.
If the response time is over 10 minutes for those types of calls, your next option for our crews will be probably take them to the...
So this is extremely important because the EMS supervisor mentions two big problems: delivery vehicles and bike lanes, which you can see we're still putting down out here. But in order to add this bike lane and this pedestrian walkway that two people are standing in right now, the city had to give up 2 lanes that could have been used to improve the flow of traffic headed north. Look, see this ambulance right here? It's so big that it has to ride on the road. It can't take a shortcut and get itself through the bike lane here. It's not gonna happen. It's just sitting in traffic. But you know who else is forbidden from using these pedestrian walkways? Those delivery vehicles, and that's a big issue because look at this place. We got businesses over here, we got businesses over here, we got buildings. These places need supplies. Those get dropped off in big trucks. Where's that truck gonna park? They're not allowed to park out here in all this empty space. Oh no, don't do that. Nope, they gotta park over there in the street where you only have 3 lanes, obstructing one of those lanes, and now you're down to 2 lanes. It's an absolute disaster. Now, it's important to understand that before we get into how rising violence might be contributing to increasing 911 calls, that you understand this recent road redesign wasn't supposed to be a problem because of congestion pricing, which is what these toll readers are for, but it's been put on pause. However, proponents of this plan to tax every single car on the road thought that it was going to be the savior of our traffic problems, at least in Manhattan anyways, because people were going to have to pay a significant amount of money every single day just to have a vehicle on the road here. But the reason congestion pricing's been shut down is because not only was it going to create more traffic problems elsewhere, many people deemed it completely unaffordable for the everyday working man. But if you think this is stupid and absolutely ridiculous, put your seatbelt on because it's about to get even worse, and we still haven't got to any of the issues that are causing the volume of 911 calls our EMS services are getting to go through the roof.
You can look no further than 34th Street for bus lane violations, people driving and parking and double parking in the bus lane. But come Monday, that could all change with fines in the mail. That's New York City traffic.
So not only have we made the roads smaller by adding in bike lanes that supposedly protect cyclists from traffic, we've got bus lanes now to make it even worse. Here we have ourselves a beautiful looking bus lane. Got the bus stopping here to pick up passengers. That's how things should work, but doesn't work thousands of times a day when it gets obstructed by vehicles that use it when they shouldn't be. Even bikes in the bus lane are a problem, and the city allows this to happen. And this is kind of ridiculous because if the city were to keep the bus lanes clear, they could also be used by emergency vehicles that have to get places quickly. But look, see? You got people driving in the bus lane, using it to take shortcuts, using it to get around traffic jams. What a mess. But we allow this because none of these people are getting in trouble for doing it. But it gets even worse because even when the city does crack down and issue fines and tickets to people, nobody pays them. Look at this. They got $1 billion in outstanding fines, revealing that lawlessness isn't just a problem in our criminal underworld. It's a problem pretty much everywhere among all facets of society. And as we'll soon see, yes, rising violence has a lot to do with why there are more reasons for ambulances to go places and try to save people. But when the city fails in its mission to maintain orderly streets, those ambulances cannot do their job, which makes our streets even less safe than they already are, exacerbating the problems our EMS crews face in the first place. And before we get into the crime component of this, realize that any emergency is going to be impeded by lawless streets, even if it's something as simple as traffic violations. If there's some sort of emergency that might not require an ambulance but requires a police car like this one right here, how are they going to get somewhere quickly if there are cars in front of them, if there are cars behind them? This puts the whole city in a worse place. All because none of the people with college degrees who decided to redesign our roads to disincentivize driving, a practice people rely on, never realized this would cause problems that are irreversible. So we now know that shrinking our roads was a bad idea and has led to traffic jams, which increase the wait times for ambulances and are causing shortages. But what about the other problems that are leading to a greater need for emergency services in the first place? What about rising crime? What about rising violence? And is there any connection at all between any of this and the asylum crisis? What about that? So here we are, 8th Avenue, Manhattan, an area of town that many locals have suggested is not exactly as safe as it used to be. This is an area that has a lot of ambulance calls headed to it. Obviously, we're surrounded by them, which puts an incredible strain on emergency medical services. And look at this thing out here. It's parked in the middle of a bike lane. I don't even know how it was able to get in there, but while it's here, it can't be somewhere else. And that's a big problem. And now the question is, what's causing this rise in ambulance calls? Is this related to one specific crisis in our city, or is it a citywide problem happening everywhere?
Data shows that 911 emergencies are continuing to rise each year across the city. Brooklyn has both the highest rate of calls and also the largest increase since 2021. But EMS workers say that there's not enough resources.
So look at that. As bad as 8th Avenue might be with all of the crime and illegal activity taking place here, EMS shortages are actually worse out in Brooklyn, which could be for a couple of reasons. Brooklyn is very large geographically, and if they have similar staffing levels to Manhattan as far as ambulances go, they have further to go between trips. That could be one problem. But what we can tell is that it's not related to the asylum crisis, because if you look at this map here of Brooklyn, all of those red dots are shelters for asylum seekers. There are about as many here as there are in Manhattan, which has 49. Brooklyn's got 48. Excuse me, Brooklyn has 49, Manhattan has 48, but Queens, they've got the most shelters. They've got 69 of them, but that's not where most of the 911 activity is. You'd think that if 911 activity were related to the asylum crisis, there'd be some sort of correlation here, but there isn't. Now, that doesn't mean that just like 8th Avenue here, there aren't occasional 911 calls to areas of town that might have an asylum shelter. This doesn't excuse the presence of gangs in one or two of the shelters that are making things much more dangerous for the people who live there who aren't here to commit crime. But shelters that have been reported as having a lot of gang activity inside of them, there's only 3, maybe 4 in total, and the city has almost 200 facilities like this. The same places are the ones that keep making their way into the news over and over again. But even though there's no connection between that and our ambulance shortage, there is a connection between overall rising crime in this city. And when you've got assaults up 40% over the last 5 years, when you've got the former governor of New York City getting assaulted with his stepson while he's walking his dog down the street, which requires a 911 call and emergency services, taking people to the hospital to get checked out, the problem's pretty clear. It's happening everywhere. In fact, things are particularly bad in certain areas of Brooklyn, like the downtown area, where a McDonald's in a very busy location was on the receiving end of collateral damage from crazy people who decided to use weapons in the middle of the road one afternoon. Criminals who, by the way, were never apprehended. They escaped on foot, which means they're still out there, and that's the issue. These streets are dangerous because we've got bad people walking around on them, fearing absolutely nothing, thinking they can do whatever they want. And lately, there's even been a crime wave involving attacks on elderly New Yorkers. Just senseless, rampant violence out of nowhere, all of it leading to 911 calls. And observers say if we're just going to allow people to get randomly attacked and not catch those people, not stop them, not pass laws that put them in jail, we shouldn't be surprised when we've got ambulances headed out the door every 15 seconds to save somebody.
City data shows EMS response times went up by more than a minute between 2021 and 2023, and the number of ambulances on the road decreased by 11%.
We are budgeted to handle about 4,200 calls a day, and there are days where we are doing 4,500, 46. Sometimes we touch 5,000.
Yeah, there's the issue. Our EMS workers, they're getting thousands of calls a day above the capacity that they're budgeted to handle. No wonder these folks are overworked. No wonder there are shortages. And these calls are happening all over the place, every single neighborhood. This is a city-wide problem. But funding for our EMS services, hiring more people, staffing more ambulances, that's only part of the problem. Because what good's that going to do if they can't move through traffic and get anywhere? There will always be shortages as long as we have that problem. But we better do something quick, because the folks that are responsible for driving these things and taking care of us in an emergency, they can't be overworked forever if we expect them to work forever, that's for sure.
Employees say salary raises can help.
Give us a reason to stay. Give people a reason to want to join EMS, and then we'll fill those spots.
To encourage many.
So there you have it. This all comes down to money. We've got to pay people more if we want to have these things staffed as is, and we spent a whole bunch of money to get to this problem of traffic gridlock, because redesigning all these roads to be narrower and smaller and more congested cost a lot, and we've spent that money. We can't get it back. And now New York finds itself having to make the best of a bad situation, a mess of its own making, so to speak. It's possible for the city to do that, but it's gonna require people to get out here and remove cars from the road that are in the way of emergency vehicles. Like if you've got vehicles that are illegally parked, blocking these things from getting to an emergency, every second counts. That shouldn't be tolerated, and if people get fines for doing that, they should have their registration or something voided. There should be real consequences, just like there should be real consequences for those who hurt people and trigger 911 calls in the first first place. How bad is the traffic? Give me your honest opinion. You know better than anybody.
It's terrible. It's horrendous.
It's bad?
Sometimes I kind of favor the congestion price.
Have a good one, my friend. Right. Take care. Yep. He's right, and as long as our roads remain the way that they are, as congested as they are, eventually there will be public willpower to reactivate congestion pricing, and it's going to happen. Meanwhile, we've got vast, unused pieces of road like these bike lanes and these pedestrian pathways. Look at that. Would it be cheaper in the long run and better for New Yorkers to redesign our streets so that we don't have these problems? Do we need 20 feet of pedestrian space and an extra 10 feet of bike lane space dedicated just for those purposes? But more importantly, should we put the people in jail who are the entire reason 911 keeps ringing in the city? Would that be a good idea? Would that lower our crime rates and our ambulance shortages at the exact same time? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.